Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm James Kramer, Community Relations Manager here for Clues Memorial Hall of Butler University, and it's a real treat and a pleasure to have you all here this evening for our first Clues Conversations of the 15-16 season. As you see on the table there, we have a list of all the other conversations. Encourage you to come back, check them out, bring a friend, and share some of the wonderful stories and reminiscences that we have of various topics that we have coming up. Engage in that and really take advantage of it. Also, you may have noticed that when you came in, we had this evening a gallery tour. The artist was here talking about his work. We try to align those throughout the season. You'll notice if you come early, generally 6 to 7 o'clock, we have a gallery tour, and then the 7:30 to 8:30 is the conversation time. A little bit of housekeeping. Of course, you've got the restrooms, exit doors on either side of the room here. Restrooms are all upstairs. If you've got any electronic devices that are going to make noise and things, you might want to check those now to make sure that they don't go off. I will also say that we are filming this evening's conversation so that we can have that on demand on our website. There's a tab that says On Demand, Clues on Demand, so that we can go back and reference that. Certainly, I'm sure that you'll want to go back and relive that, as well as to share it with some friends who were unable to attend with us this evening. It's just a great resource for us to have that. And at this time, it's just a great treat. Clearly, from what I saw going on before the conversation started, needs no introduction, but I do want you to help me welcome Sid Weedman.
Please hold your applause till the end. I want to thank you all for coming, particularly all my relatives and friends, and especially those people that I don't know. You really are taking a risk here. But October the 18th, in about 6 weeks, marks the 52nd anniversary of the grand opening of Clues Memorial Hall. Now, this wonderful facility was made possible by a gift of the Clues family for about $3 million in memory of Dr. George Henry Alexander Clues, who was born in 1877 in England, and he came to the United States and became the research director for Eli Lilly and Company in 1977. He died he didn't come in 77, he came in research director in 1919. He headed up a team that discovered how to manufacture insulin, which was the first successful treatment for diabetes. And that was a major game changer for Eli Lilly and Company and also for the Clues family. Now, the Clues family were great supporters of the arts in Indianapolis and central Indiana, but their primary support went to the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra and a few other organizations, but specifically their own private collection of old master paintings and sculptures, and those can be seen today at the Clues Pavilion at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and there's approximately 500 in the collection. So the idea was to build this multi-purpose hall in his memory, and it would be the permanent home of the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra and the performing arts. A couple of years ago, celebrating this 50th anniversary, there was an article in the Indianapolis Star that said, when culture comes to Indy, well, I would say it wasn't culture, there's always culture, but this is when entertainment came to Indy, because at that time, the Indianapolis Symphony played a 20-week season. They now play 52 weeks. And the Civic Theater, they had 4 or 5 productions during the winter. Starlight Musicals had 6 or 8 during the summer. There were a few amateur groups that would perform wherever they could find a space. So there was no Palladium. There was no Clips Music Center. There was no White River Park Amphitheater. No National Bank of Indiana Theater. The Indiana Repertory Theater was a movie house. The Circle Theater was a movie house. No Market Square, no Bankers Life Field House, and on and on and on. there was a state fair and there was a 500-mile race, but there wasn't really what we have today. And we have so much today, but Clues was the very beginning of that. So for the next 15 to 20 years after it opened, Clues Hall was sort of the focal point of entertainment. There was a great deal of anticipation and excitement and enthusiasm about the building of the hall because it was the first multi-purpose hall that had built in the United States since prior to World War II. Lincoln Center had opened Avery Fisher Concert Hall in year before, in 1961, but the other halls didn't open until after Clues Hall did. The Kennedy Center didn't open until 1971. So nationally, and of course locally, but nationally there was a lot of interest in this too. Not so much interest from Butler University. President Alexander Jones was interviewed and asked what this would mean to the Butler University, and he said, well, we could have used an aircraft carrier about as well as we can use this. Remember, he came from Kansas, and he was like Harry Truman, you know, he spoke his mind. The dean of the music school, when they were talking about getting a manager, he said they don't need a manager, they need a secretary with a calendar. Because what have they got to do? They've got freshman orientation, commencement, some ballet performances in between, and a few music concerts from the School of Music. So they don't need a manager. Well, Alan Clues had some other ideas about that. And so he hired Travis Selmeyer. Now, Travis Selmeyer was local. He was a dancer, a choreographer. He founded Footlight Musicals and founded the Zering Theater. And so for a year ahead of time, they both Alan and Trav worked on the programming for the hall, and they were going to go big time. Now, my association came in the spring before it opened because I was teaching theater next door, and I was building a set for a show, and this gentleman came over and kind of poked around, asked a few questions, and he was the head stagehand for Clues Hall. So after a little bit, I guess he figured out that I knew which end of a hammer to hold. And he said, well, we're outfitting the stage right now. And he said, we're hanging lights and curtains and on and on and on. And he said, we don't always have a full crew, and we could use some help if you'd be interested. Now, you'll be paid union stagehand wages. You will not be a union stagehand, but you'll be paid those wages. And I said, well, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. So for that summer, I worked whenever there was an opening for the backstage here at Clues. Trav came up to me and said, we would like for you to produce and manage the grand opening of the hall. And that would consist of, on Friday night, the Indianapolis Symphony. On Saturday night, or Saturday morning, would be 2 shows of Captain Kangaroo. Saturday evening would be 2 Bob Hope shows. Sunday was a chamber concert, and Tuesday was a Butler production of Mother Courage. Well, sure, I'd be glad to do that. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I'd be glad to do it. Well, let me tell you the grand opening, and we have a lady right back here who was on the original Clues Hall Women's Committee, and she was very involved with that. Anyway, the grand opening was like the Academy Awards. I mean, there was a red carpet, there were valet parking, women in long dresses and men in black ties, searchlights. The Today Show was here with a crew and personalities. And I mean, the front end of the house was almost as elaborate as the back end. So after you get all of these events or these ceremonies, these activities finished in the front, then the concert started. The head stagehand and I are standing back there sort of congratulating each other and feeling pretty good about ourselves, and we're also breathing a big sigh of relief because we hadn't had much sleep for about 2 hours, or two weeks. So we're standing there and we hear this squeak, squeak, squeak. We turned around and here is Alan Clues, an elegant gentleman, over 6 feet tall, white tie, tails, and he has sneaked down from his personal box, come down the back stairs, and he's walking across the stage trying to be quiet, but it isn't being quiet. Now, below stage, down in the dressing room area, we had vending machines, and one of them spit out hot coffee, hot chocolate, and hot chicken soup. Remember, this was 1963, and the cost was a dime for a cup of coffee. Here's this man, he and his family have given $3 million to this event, and he comes up and says, "Do either of you gents have a dime for a hot chicken soup?" Well, I went on the next 3 years doing stage work, teaching at Butler, and doing production work for various shows that didn't have a stage manager or designer or production manager. And after 3 years, they had I don't know what you want to call them. I mean, James has got that title now, I guess, but it was either advertising, public relations, community relations, marketing, whatever you want to call them. They'd had 3 of those positions in 3 years. So I met with Travis Selmeyer and said, "I want to be your PR guy." He said, "What do you know about it?" I said, "I don't know anything." I said, "But I know you, and I know what you want, and I know you haven't been happy, so, you know, I'll do it." So that's what happened. Now, one of my first assignments was that he had booked Judy Garland for 2 days or 2 nights and performance each night. Now, Judy Garland was not the steadiest person in the world. So you never quite knew what mood she was in or what she was going to do. So I was sent to the airport to make sure she was on the plane, got off the plane, and was in a decent emotional, mental state. She's the first one off the plane. She bounces off the plane. I go up and introduce myself, and I said, "I'm here to pick you up, Miss Garland." She said, "Well, then pick me up." And she threw her arms around my neck and jumped up in the air. I didn't know what to do with her. But I knew that I shouldn't sit her down. I mean, you know, I needed to do something, so I carried her all the way through the terminal to her limousine. The second night, she performed wonderfully both nights, but the second night, she and I are standing backstage waiting for her to go on, and she said, "Mr. Wheatman, I could play Clues Hall 365 nights a year. This has been wonderful." The next weekend, they had to break down a hotel room door to get into her because she was in one of her, whatever it is. So anyway, that was my sort of initiation to public relations. After 3 years, Travis left, and I became manager of the hall. And I decided I would still be the PR director because, one, it's cheaper that way, and 2, I knew what I wanted to happen. So I filled those 2 positions in by myself. And in those, we did not rent to outside promoters. We did not want to go in competition with our competitors. So everything we booked, we chose ourselves and we sold ourselves. It's a little bit like investor strategy. You buy low and you sell high. And like investor strategy, it doesn't always work that way. But several instances of how it was interesting, the outcome. Neil Diamond has played Indianapolis every year for decades. His first appearance was on the stage at Clues Hall. He was the opening act for Bobby Gentry, Tallahatchie Bridge, and he had Kentucky Woman, and he was there in a white buckskin fringed jacket. And anyway, they did these 2 performances, and we paid him $1,500. Now, the next year, he played Market Square Arena and sold it out. And he was here recently, and I understand his fee was $600,000 plus any probably percentage that goes on top of that. So then we also had Neil Diamond, paid him $5,000, had half a house, and the next year he sold out Market Square Arena. We had Barbara Streisand, paid her $8,000. She sold half a house, and in 6 months she was the toast of Broadway and Funny Girl. So you just never know how this is going to go, and of course it can bite you too. Maria Callas, some of you younger members here will not remember or know who she is, but she was an international opera star, a diva. And she also was a longtime companion of the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis, who left her, dumped her, to marry Jackie Kennedy. So she was available, and I thought people will really want to see her. She'd never been to Indianapolis, so we engaged her. $25,000. I mean, $25,000 today is a lot of money, but then that was a fortune. Well, 2 weeks into the ticket sales, we'd sold about 500 tickets. Now, I've never seen anybody sweat bloody bullets, but I did. We're entertaining people at our house for dinner on a Sunday night, and the phone rings. Said, "This is Shelley Gold." Now, Shelley Gold is Miss Callas's manager. I said, "Shelley, how you doing?" He said, "Great." He said, "How's the Callas concert?" I said, "Well, we're just selling tickets hand over fist." You learn to lie in this business. "Oh, that's great." He said, "Well, I'm backstage at Carnegie Hall, and she can't sing tonight because she got a sore throat. And I was wondering if we could work out an arrangement where we would reschedule her at Clues later." Well, Shelley, gee, we got a lot of money in this. I mean, we've got ticket printing, we got program printing, we've got advertising, and on and on and on. And he said, "Well, how much have you spent?" I said, $5,000. He said, "Well, send me a letter tomorrow if you'll do this. Send me a letter and I'll reimburse you the $5,000. I got the $5,000, and he never called back to re-engage her. So after the beginning and the opening, Clues Hall was on the A list for all kinds of touring attractions. For Broadway shows, dance companies, concerts, symphonies, opera, special productions, and I'm going to name drop a few here now. There was Hello Dolly with Mary Martin, Camelot with Robert Goulet, Johnny Carson, Gloria Swanson, Joan Rivers, she wasn't a star then, Betty Davis, Marlene Dietrich, Sir John Gielgud, Helen Hayes, Rudolph Nureyev, Sonny and Cher, Debbie Reynolds, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Walter Cronkite, Maurice Chevalier, Cheech and Chong, and there are a lot of Cheech and Chongs too. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, of course now they're called the Jersey Boys. And we had two opera companies. Well, the first one was the Metropolitan Opera, who had never, they hadn't toured the United States for a long time. And so they wanted to get out and let the people of the United States see the Metropolitan Opera. So they came here, they chose Clues Hall, and they came here for 5 weeks and rehearsed and prepared for the tour, and also gave previews and performances here as part of that. And then we had the American National Opera Company that did the same thing, and then we had the Harkness Ballet also come in for 4 or 5 weeks to prepare. So we had all of these things going on, and once again, you know, as a manager or a PR person, what you're really trying to do is sell tickets, make money, or at least cover your expenses. We had a few of these attractions that were guaranteed sellouts year after year after year. Some of you younger people may not know these names, but the guaranteed sellouts were Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians, Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians, Mantovani Orchestra, the Vienna Choir Boys, Ferrani and Teicher, Roger Williams, and Hal Holbrook in Mark Twain Tonight. But Hal Holbrook only came every 2 years. He was a smart about his business. He didn't want to wear his welcome out. So he would only come every other year. And he did this, you would swear he was Mark Twain. It was just an hour and 15 minutes of him looking, sounding, acting, and using Mark Twain's words. The way he did this was he would come in the night before, the day before, and then he'd come to the theater the day of the performance, and he'd check out the lighting and the props. We had to get a couch or a chair and a table and a lamp and a rug, and kind of in a period of that style. And he'd come and check that out to make sure we didn't get him plastic chairs. And then he'd go back to the hotel and rest up until about 4 o'clock. And then he'd come back and put on his makeup, which was a 4-hour makeup job. At noon, his stage manager comes up and says, "We got a problem." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "I've unpacked the makeup box and I've gone through it 3 times, and his wig is not in the makeup box." Now, you know, immediately, no wig, no performance, another 2 years. And we were sold out. You know, it was a big show. And he said, "I'm trying to call him at the hotel, but he's got his phone turned off." I said, "Well, I can fix that." And I called the hotel manager, and they got the phone put on, and then he and the stage manager had a conversation. Well, it turns out that he had his wig cleaned after his last performance, taken it back to his apartment, stored it in his closet, and didn't put it in the makeup box. He said, "Now, my mother-in-law could go over and get it, but I don't know how we'd get it here in time for performance." I said, "I do," because at that time, TWA had 2 round-trip flights a day from here to New York. His mother-in-law went over and got the wig, got on the plane. I picked her up at 4 o'clock out at the airport, drove her back to the stage door. She comes in, and he's standing there. He says, "Oh, Mom, thank you." Hugs her, takes the paper bag, and heads downstairs. She gets back in the car. I take her to the airport, and she goes back to New York. It was a great performance. The best time for entertainment, at least when I was here, was between Christmas and New Year, because you've got a lot of guests, you got family home, and once you open up the gifts and you have the dinner and et cetera, you want something to do. Well, we couldn't find anything to book because everybody else was on vacation. So I decided I would put together a vaudeville show. So I got a magician and a juggler and a Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop and Donald O'Connor. Well, this show was going along. We sold a lot of tickets. This show was really going well. A good friend of mine who was on a board of trustees at Indiana State University said, "You know, I want to have a dinner for all the trustees," and he said, "here in Indianapolis, and then I'd like to take them to a show. Now, will this be a good show? I mean, one they'd enjoy?" I said, "Oh, sure, it's great." Well, everything went well until Donald O'Connor went on stage. Now, if you remember Singing in the Rain, he was this wonderful dancer with Debbie Reynolds and Gene Kelly. Well, now he gained about 50 or 60 pounds, and he might have had a little too much to drink. But he got out on stage. Before he went out, he said, "Now, when I do Bojangles," he said, "that'll be the last number, okay?" Well, he went out there, and he had no act, he had no preparation, nothing. He just stood out there and kind of talked to the audience about his career and et cetera, and pretty soon there were a few boos coming, you know. And he said, "Well, what would you like for me to do?" And this voice in the audience said, "Go home." So he said, "Well, let me show you how I used to dance." And the proscenium wall was concrete. He runs over there and tries to run up the wall, and he gets about 2 steps up and goes kaboom. And when he's getting up, he rips out the seat of his pants. Well, by this time, I've got stagehands in all of the different slots, the wing slots, and we're all saying, "Do Bojangles, do Bojangles." They also had instructions that if he got close enough that they could reach out and grab him, drag him off. I said, "I don't want you to run out there, but if you can get your arm out there, get him." Well, he got through it. Now, the aftermath of that is that today, my wife Sharon, sitting right over here, whenever we're at an event where it's getting a little boring, one or the other will say, "Do Bojangles." Well, this friend of mine that was on the Board of Trustees at Indiana State, today he can tell you the names of every one of those performers. He was so upset and embarrassed about bringing his trustees to that show, and of course he wasn't half as upset as I was. Now there's a follow-up story to that. About sometime in next year or so, I get a phone call from a guy named Roy Rudin, and he's a promoter that's got a vaudeville show. And he reads off what all's in it, and it doesn't sound bad, and the price was good. I said, "Well, who's the headliner?" "Well, we haven't decided that yet." Well, this went on for several weeks, and he wouldn't tell me who the headliner was. And I finally, asked, "Is it Donald O'Connor?" "Well, we don't know yet." So I finally said, "Okay, we'll take the show, but there's going to be an addendum to the contract that if Donald O'Connor shows up at Clues Hall or on this campus, you will not get paid. The show is null and void." Okay, that's fine. Well, the headliner was Milton Berle. Now, it was interesting because backstage, Milton Berle ended up being the stage manager. I mean, this guy's old showbiz, and he's calling the light cues, and he's calling the curtains, and he's telling everybody where to go, and I mean, he's just all over the place. And Roy Rudin, who looks like what I always thought Nero Wolfe looked like, he was a huge guy in a pearl gray three-piece suit and gray shirt and gray silk tie and a gray Homburg and probably gray shoes. And he was wandering around there like he was lost. But about a year later, they found Roy Rudin murdered in the bottom of a canyon out by Los Angeles. And Roy Rudin was sort of on the outskirts of show business. I mean, he was a fringe player, but he wanted to make the movie Cotton Club. And Robert Evans was the CEO, the president of Paramount Pictures. There was a woman who provided Robert Evans with drugs, and she told Rudin that she would get him in touch with Robert Evans, and he was to pay her $50,000 for this introduction. The introduction took place, but Rudin never paid her the money. So she and three other guys got rid of him. And there has been a television documentary about it. There's been a book written about it. And I mean, it was quite sensational. And but Cotton Club did get produced by Robert Evans, and it was a great show, great movie. So that was sort of the aftermath of that. Hair was a major show at this time that I'm talking about. And I didn't care for Hair very much, but I did like Aquarius, the musical number, but the rest of it was so-so. But they wanted to play here for 3 weeks. Now, every year, we had a meeting right here in this room, and with a committee that was consisted of Mr. Eli Lilly, Alan Clues, President Jones, a faculty member, and I don't know who else, maybe somebody from the Women's Committee. But the idea was that I would present what was going to be available, or what we thought was going to be available. So we had this meeting, and we went through all of the possible shows, and then I said, and then there's Hair, and President Jones went absolutely ballistic. I mean, I've never seen such a hissy fit. And finally, when he calmed down enough, I said, well, now, President Jones, I'm not a big fan of it, but it's 3 weeks, and I mean, we'd make enough money on this to pay off all our debts and make money for years to come. He said, let me tell you, you can make money by running a whorehouse. So after the meeting, Mr. Eli Lilly and I went up this elevator over here. We happened to be just the two of us. He sort of chuckled and he said, I don't know very much about this business, but that sure was an interesting discussion, wasn't it? We booked Hair, and or not hair. We didn't book hair. We booked Grease. Now we had it for a week, and that was 8 performances. And the first 4 performances are sold to season ticket holders, so they take up the first 12 or 15 rows. So in Grease, if you stood up on the balcony and looked down, the first 15 rows were pretty much gray hairs. And then there were all of these young people back and up into the balconies, and it was full. The house was full. Well, you watched, and as Grease went on, the gray hairs were they didn't get it. But the young people did. Well, it was sold out the entire week, and it was very successful. And about a week or so later, I get a call to go over to President Jones' office. He said, "Now, Sid, Mr. Lilly did not see Grease, but friends of his did, and they didn't like it. And they told him about it. And the problem with this is, Clouse Hall and Butler University are in his will for enough money to take care of Clouse Hall forever. So I want you to remember that and be very careful about what you book in the future." How do I know what's going to offend him? I mean, I can't read his mind. I need some guidelines here. What am I going to do? And he said, "There's a comedian, I think his name is George Carlin. He said, he has 7 words that you can't say on television. Now, I think if any show has one of those words in it, you don't book it." Well, I didn't know what was going to happen about that, but surprisingly, there was only one show that we were not able to book that I wanted to, and it was same time next year with Cloris Leachman. But that's other than that, that's the way it got by. This was during the Cold War, and the Russian companies were able to come over because there was a Russian immigrant named Sol Hurok, and he was able, for some reason, to bring over these big productions from Russia. So we had the Bolshoi Ballet, and it was interesting whenever you had a big company like that. There would be 2 members of the bomb squad here ahead of it and during the entire performance. And there would be 8 or 10 motorcycle cops that would give them an escort. And so you'd see these big motorcycle cops, and they always look bigger than they really are because they're like football players, what they wear. They have these big leather jackets, and they had the leather boots and the helmets and the guns, and they're all lined up like this against the wall. The ballet dancers come running off, and that's the first thing they see. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what kind of a police state they think we are. Well, there was a guy with the company, and his name was Max Gershinoff. And Max Gershinoff was the translator, the troubleshooter, the go-to guy to get things fixed. His parents, I think he'd been born in Russia, but he was now a U.S. citizen, spoke both languages perfectly. And one of Max's jobs was every night after the performance, and they got back to the hotel, when the Bolshoi had played the Kennedy Center in Washington, Bobby Kennedy got a crush on one of the dancers. Max Gershinoff would go to the dancer's room, call Bobby Kennedy in Washington, and then translate between the 2 of them. I'd love to have that tape. We're winding down, getting ready for questions and answers here in a minute, but the 1972, we had Applause with Lauren Bacall coming in for a week. Now, this was the New York production with the New York star, and everybody in the country wanted it, so it was highly competitive to get it. And we didn't think we were going to get it because they said, well, we can play so-and-so and make more money, and we can do this and do that. Now, fortunately, my wife Sharon was she danced with Ron Fields, who was the choreographer director for 2 seasons of musicals, and he also sublet our apartment one summer. So we had this sort of connection, and we tried to use that as much as we could, and we had Governor Whitcomb write a letter, and I mean, you know, we did pulled out every stop, and they came. And it was sold out, and everybody was excited, and the week before they were to perform, or to open, the Indianapolis Symphony went on strike. Now, in these productions, like I'm talking about, there's 4 to 6 labor unions involved, and we were very concerned that when the company came up in their trucks and their buses, they wouldn't cross the picket line. So we exercised a clause in our rental agreement between Butler University and the Symphony that said if there was a labor disruption, we could ask the Symphony to leave the premises, and they would have to leave. And they did. I mean, we exercised that, and they did. Show went on. It was very successful. And after, I don't know, several months later on, the Symphony finally settled the labor problem. The chairman of the Symphony Board of Trustees resigned, as did several other board members, and the manager went to Florida, and I became manager of the Symphony in addition to managing Clues Hall. Now, if I look back on this, I don't know whether that was a lack of judgment or not, but you know, I didn't know anything about music. I couldn't sing Happy Birthday. But I did know something about promotion. I did know something about what audiences liked, and et cetera. And so I took this job on, and at the same time, the public did not like labor strikes. And they certainly didn't think that musicians ought to be unionized. So the ticket sales had gone into the tank, and so had the funding, and a 20-year music director who'd been here for 20 years resigned or retired. So it was a great opportunity. You start down here and you can build it up, maybe. Well, for the next 5 years, was one of my primary jobs. Oh, and by the way, I did hire a PR director then. After 5 years, we got the Symphony on its feet. And I'm not saying it wasn't on its feet, but we got the ticket sales up to where they should be, and the funding, got a new music director, and we got some excitement and interest in what was going on. Things were going quite well with the Symphony. I was getting a little tired working both of those jobs every day of the year. So I had an opportunity to go to a new organization called the Commission for Downtown, which purpose was to renovate downtown Indianapolis. I took it, and I'd been there about a year, and the chairman of the Indianapolis Power and Light Company called me and the chairman, my boss, in, and he said, now, the Circle Theater is right next door to us. He said, it has really run downhill. He said, now all they're doing is showing black sexploitation movies, and the word is that somebody's going to buy it and make a pornographic film house out of it. We aren't going to have that next to our company. There's 2 choices. We tear it down, or we renovate it and make it a theater, like Clues Hall. And that's what I want to do. And Sid, you're the very person, you know how all this works. So he said, we want you to be involved with it. Well, I was skeptical because what I thought would happen would be then we'd have 2 theaters, and they'd both be competing for the same entertainment, and that just raises the price for the entertainer, and you know, we all lose a little bit there. But we hired Evans Woolen, the architect for this structure right here, and he designed a theater, and he was going to present it to this committee, which we were involved with. And the day before he was to present this, the Indianapolis Symphony met with us and said, we need to leave Clues Hall because there's just not enough time for us out there to rehearse and perform. And so if you would make this into a concert hall, we will take it over as our permanent home for its perpetuity. So the meeting, I went in and I said, well, the theater's off and it's going to be a concert hall for the symphony. Evans Llewellyn gets up, walks out. The whole thing was dumped, and it became what it is today, the symphony's concert. Now, Alan Clues was convinced until he died that I had arranged this, and I hadn't. I hadn't done anything, but boy, he was very upset and very hurt about it, but that was the story. So, anyway, there's a lot of other things, but now I think it's probably best to, if you've got questions, I'll try to have answers. Yes?
Can you tell us about any paragraphs or restrictions in contracts with some of your talent that were really unusual?
Well, Debbie Reynolds and her boyfriend, they wanted a suite or a hotel room or whatever, but they demanded 2 bathrooms. Carol Channing had a cook with her. She had terrible allergies, and she had a cook with her that would cook her food, and she would bring it. She didn't drink bottled water. She drank sterilized water. So we had to have sterilized water, and we had to have this facility that had a kitchen for her cook, and she would come to the show, and she'd have something that looked like ground up artichoke hearts or something in there, and that's what she ate. So that was sort of the cauliflower. Yeah, that was. Those are a couple of things I can think of. Did you have something in mind?
I knew a guy that was the stage manager at Kentucky Center for the Arts, and he said Art Garfunkel had a clause in his contract that said nobody backstage could look at him.
No, we didn't have anything like that, and we didn't have anything, but others did. As these contemporary music people started becoming very popular, they'd put things in there just to make you jump. You know, like well, they wanted M&Ms, but they only wanted yellow ones. You know, and that was before they made M&Ms in specific colors. They were all mixed, so somebody had to go out there and pick all those yellow ones out. Yes?
Your comment about the president of Butler University at the time this was built saying, we need this like we need an aircraft carrier. Why was the decision made to build Clues here as opposed to some other location if you didn't have the support of the president?
Well, the board supported it because Alan Clues was on the board of trustees. And they didn't want to go against Alan because they were looking way down the road to see how much money they might get out of him. And the other thing was that they were a very small, almost a commuter college. I mean, it was like 2,000 or less. And they had a very limited budget, and so they had to take care of the utilities and the maintenance of the hall. They didn't have to pay for any losses in entertainment, but they had to pay for the hall. And the third thing was that the $3 million wasn't enough. It was about 3.5 or 3.6, something like that. And this is called the Krannert Room because Herman Krannert gave a huge chunk of money to kind of make up, and I think many of the board members had to kick in and finish it up. And so there was a little, plus he was an academic to the core. And show business, you know, that's not us. So, yes?
Well, did they have the school of music? You said you worked in the theaters.
Yes.
So they already had the school of music, the school of theater. What else was here that was along the arts?
They had dance, and they had radio and television. And all of that was housed in this Lilly Hall, which is just next door. And but again, it was, what do I want to say? The dance school was big time. The rest of it was just I mean, IU had the theater school and the opera school and the music school. Ballet and dance was the big thing out of this school, the College of Fine Arts. Yes? It went to the Circle Theater. And Sharon and I were invited to be the guest of the company on the opening night. And there was a gentleman who, he was, I don't quite know how to describe him. If I did, why, it would be pretty bizarre. But anyway, he would come to the symphony and he would sit in the center, fourth, fifth row, right down front, and he would get up at the end of a concert and boo the orchestra. His name was Ted Popoff, and he popped off a lot. And anyway, here we are at the Circle Theater, and the intermission, we're walking out, and he and whoever he's with were right behind us, and he starts in. He says, "You've got a nerve to be here." And I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "You wouldn't book this at Clues Hall. Why would you come here?" And I mean, he was just ripping me up one side, down the other. And we get out in the lobby, and it kind of pretty soon began to look like a schoolyard when there's a fight. I mean, there's all these people circled around like this, and he and I are right in the center. And I'm looking over, and there's Howard Caldwell and Mike Ahern and all the. I smiled at him, walked up to right by his ear, and says, "If you don't shut up, I'm going to kick the blankety blank out of you right here in front of everybody." Smiled again, shook his hand. He left. Yeah, we saw hair. And it was just as bad as when we saw it in New York. So. Other questions? Yes, John. Well, you only asked that because that's where you promoted it here, I know. Nothing like what I'm talking about here, but for his performance, we wanted to show off this marvelous technology of the stage. So we had an overture that was composed and written for his opening. And so when the house lights went down, we had all the curtains out, so it was just a bare stage. And we brought in the overhead border lights and started twinkling them up and down. And then we would bring in curtains at various times. And the orchestra pit was all the way to the bottom. And so when they started playing, we brought it up, and it came all the way up to stage level. And then we took it back down to playing level so you could see their heads, but, And then we had made these cloth panels that were about this wide and 35 feet tall or long. And they were on different battens or pipes that hang. So we would bring them in at different speeds and at different levels and kind of made a dance out of them. And when we got them all in, the orchestra played its finale. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Hope. Boy, Alan Clues really overproduces, doesn't he? And we had to build a little trolley like, the mechanics used to slide underneath a car to work on the underneath side of the car before they had the hydraulic lifts. And it was just a flat thing with casters on it. And I don't remember what the deal was, but at the end, he got on that, and we pulled him off the rope. So the first show, we're pulling him off, and he's yelling, "Too fast, too fast, too fast." So the next show, he gets on, and we pull him much slower, and he's going off. He said, "Last show, they pulled me all the way to Bean Blossom," he said. Yeah. Yes.
It's probably hard, but could you name like your favorite performer and then maybe the least favorite or more difficult performer?
Donald O'Connor was one. Well, and a lot of this has to do with personality as much as their performance, but for the male side, Walter Cronkite and Ray Milland were my two favorites. And for the female side, Mary Martin, she was a gracious, wonderful lady, very talented. Mary Martin, oh, Pearl Bailey. Now, the reason Pearl Bailey was because I sat in her dressing room and just chatted with her for over an hour, and she was the most wonderful person to talk to, just really warm and friendly, and told a lot of stories. And then there was another one which you may not recognize, was Jane Morgan. Jane Morgan was a vocalist. She didn't get to the Barbra Streisand level, but she was extremely good. And she did 2 shows here with the 500 Festival, and I designed the lighting and did the stage called the lighting cues and so forth. She did 2 shows, and after the first show, I went down and said, "Now, is there anything you'd like to have changed?" And she said, "No." She turned to her manager and she said, "I want him to go with us for all of our concerts because he knows what he's doing." Well, that got to me, The Ray Milland, and again, for some of you younger people, won't recognize that name, but he was an Academy Award winner in a movie, The Lost Weekend. And he was here in a detective play called Sleuth. And we had a party afterwards. The Women's Committee usually had an opening night party. And so it was down at the Murat Hotel. And he came in, and he was bald as I am. I mean, he wore a wig, a toupee in the play, and he looked like Ray Milland, but he just took it off and came to the party. He went around and talked to everybody and was just so gracious. Now, a little side note to that there was an older woman and a very young girl sitting at the sideline. And the woman kind of beckoned to me, and I came over, and she said, "I want you to meet this young lady." Said, "This is Judy Carn." Now, years ago, there was a show called Laugh-In, and the girl said, "Sock it to me," and they'd throw, water or ice cubes or something on her, and that was Judy Carn. And she was also married to Burt Reynolds at that time. I, to this day, wonder what she was doing there, because she wasn't in the show. There was no seeming connection to it. And, but, sock it to me, I guess. So those are sort of my, Donald O'Connor. Anything else? Yes?
Did Johnny Carson just do a stand-up act?
Yes. Yeah, he did 2 shows, and he had an opening act too. And for some reason, I keep thinking that he brought Tiny Tim to do Tiptoeing Through the Tulips, not as an opening, but just as a novelty, Johnny was he's very nice, very reserved, very cool, until the second night. They wanted to take us out to dinner, so it took about 10 or 12 of us out to dinner, and we're walking into the country club, and I've got Sharon with me, and now she grew up 40 miles from Johnny's hometown in Nebraska. And I said, "Johnny, this is my wife Sharon, and she grew up in Fremont, Nebraska." Fremont, Nebraska, all of a sudden there was a change, this was home, and he became much more outgoing than he had been. So, and at dinner, he talked about popcorn, how he liked popcorn, and he wanted bacon grease on his popcorn. That really made it good. And then he talked about Zsa Zsa Gabor, and he said, "We have a rule in the studio that when Zsa Zsa Gabor comes in, nobody slams any doors because her makeup would fall right off her face. Okay, we got about 4 minutes. Or no minutes, whichever. Yes?
Is there any chance we might see Lauren Weedman around here sometime?
That's a relative, and you've got a relative in connection. I suppose in full disclosure, the lady in white is the birth mother of our youngest daughter, Lauren. And we adopted her when she was 8 days old. And she's been involved in show business and theater since she was 5 years old, and she's had some modest success. She's been in a number of movies and televisions and so forth. So that's why he asked that question. It's all family, see. Anything else? Well, thank you all very much for your being here and not booing me off the stage like Donald O'Connor.